Made it up the steps. Okay, first nightmare over. Before I start, I just want to say how excited and honored and terrified I am to be sharing this stage with so many amazingly talented people. Thank you so much to Joseph. Thank you to Jeff for putting this on and for making me a part of it. It's just such a thrill. So thank you first. Again, I'm Stephanie Landis Burris. I'm the creative director of Melamed Riley. I became creative director when I was 29. Before that, I was associate creative director. And before that, I was a copywriter. And sometime before that, I was an 8-year-old. So I think I'll just start by introducing you all to 8-year-old Stephanie Landis. Oh my. I imagine that's really large. Okay. Ugh. So aside from obviously having a knack for picking the most awesome, whimsical pair of eyeglasses ever, young Stephanie Landis was a pretty talented storyteller, and perhaps it's because I resembled a young Dr. Seuss. But I attribute it more to my parents. My dad, an incredibly intelligent engineer and businessman. My mom, a super smart, super creative grade school teacher. And that's me in the middle. And side note, can we just talk about my jeans for just 1 second? Those are the longest jeans I've ever seen on a baby. I still own these jeans and wear them all the time. So my parents encouraged me to read ravenously from a very young age, and it wasn't long before I was starting to come up with my own strange, rambling narratives. So they decided to get me involved with the Young Authors Club. It's an awesome logo. I think the glasses were based off of mine, actually. And so a couple times a year, members of the Young Authors Club would descend upon Toledo, where you'd participate in a day full of creative workshops, you could meet a famous author, and it all led up to the big moment when you got to showcase the work that you had been striving for and creating this whole time in front of the whole group. So you got to present your book to everyone. And I loved it, partially because it was really cool to see what all the other kids had come up with, but mostly because I felt like mine kicked everyone's ass. I was so excited about my books every year. I actually brought one with me. It has felt and fur and sparkles. I mean, it was like, whoa, look at this work of art. And this is, I'll just go to the next page. This is the zoo on Mars, okay? So this is one of my proudest achievements I'm holding. And as you can see by this page, it was written and illustrated by Stephanie Ray Landis. But, and this is the first time I'm publicly admitting this, I had a little bit of help. The exact creative process is a little blurry, but I think as I remember it, I would dictate the story to my mom, who would then type it out and, knowing her, probably edit it. And then my dad would take whatever I just come up with and create these lovely illustrations. And then I would color those illustrations. So here's a look at our combined efforts. This is a plappa, which you could find in the zoo on Mars, and I'll read from my book. I'll be signing copies later, just kidding. A plappa is a big red creature with large, keen ears. He loves rock and roll music. He eats nothing but records. I'm dating myself. He is especially fond of Michael Jackson albums. He's always dancing around in his cage. A plappa would be lots of fun at a party, but don't let him near the record player. Oh, boy. So clearly this was a group effort, but I loved it. I loved the finished product. My second grade year, so I was 8 years old at this point, my parents are like, this time you're doing it all alone. Like, it's up to you to conceive it, to write it, to illustrate it. This is all yours. And I'm like, great. So what did I do? I totally phoned it in. I didn't know how to use a typewriter or word processor, again, dating myself. So I had to handwrite everything. And then my illustrations were okay for a second grader, but they were nowhere near the lovely things that my dad came up with. So I wanted to keep the visuals really simple. And I ended up coming up with a book of poorly illustrated idioms entitled A Pretty Penny. So it was like 15 pages of the worst, like most groan-worthy visual puns you could imagine. The cover was a dime whistling at a penny while it strutted by. And here's a look at that. Oh, that's right. I threw it out in the garbage on my way out of the Young Authors Club that day. No photo. I was embarrassed and a little despondent over it. It just didn't make any sense to me. I wanted to make it really easy. So obviously the handwriting sucked, the visuals sucked, but then the one thing that I was good at, that storytelling and that wild imagination, I dumbed that way down because I was worried about my other limitations. So at 8 years old, I ended up learning one of those stories that would end up being absolutely critical to the arc of my career and to where I am today standing in front of you, and that is work together. So there are a lot of multi-talented people out of there. There are like a lot of people in this room that are super multi-talented. And I think there's really something commendable about having an idea and taking it from conception to completion all by yourself. That's cool. But for me, in my career, collaboration is just part of our everyday process. It is just built into what we do. And I'm so lucky to collaborate with amazing people. A lot of them are here today, so tiny shout out to them. I love you. But I think it's a great exercise for individual creatives, for independent artists. Maybe you have awesome design chops, but you want to do a project that involves hand-drawn, intricate typography. Well, work together. Or maybe you're amazing at typography, but you're stuck and you need inspiration and you're not sure what the words are. Partner up with somebody, bring your talent to a collaboration. Maybe you have an illustration and it's perfect and you love it and you wouldn't change it at all, but now it's just sitting there and you're like, oh man, that was so good. What if it was an installation or a video or an experience? I think those things are possible when you work together. I love this quote from Amy Poehler. As you navigate through the rest of your life, be open to collaboration. Others people's ideas are often better than your own. Find a group of people who challenge and inspire you. Spend a lot of time with them, and it will change your life. Like I said, I'm probably a little biased because of the business I'm in, but I think working together is awesome for a lot of reasons. Working together encourages action. So for me personally, those hardest projects to complete are the ones that are elective. They're just my personal projects where I'm the creative department, I'm the project manager, and I'm the client. On my to-do list, those rank somewhere below work projects, charity projects, home improvement projects, and catching up with like the thousands of episodes of Breaking Bad that I'm behind. When you team up, I think you increase your own personal accountability in getting a project moving and keeping it moving. I think so many great ideas for personal projects just never see the light of day because they get buried with all the other shit you have to do. I think that collaboration forces you to formulate some kind of timeline. It gets you to check in on a project's process and progress. And I think in general, it just increases the odds that you're actually gonna see an idea through to completion because you're working with somebody, you're on task. Working together increases your reach. So some people, I think, avoid collaborating because they feel like you have to give up some ownership of your idea, which is true. But I think what you lose in ownership, you gain in reach. A very literal example of this is the Swatchmobile. So the Swatchmobile was the brainchild of Nicholas Hayek, who was the CEO of SMH, which famously made Swatch watches. He had this idea for a stylish city car that utilized the same manufacturing strategies and the same personalization features as Swatch watches. So a car inspired by a watch. And he called it the Swatchmobile, very catchy. But he knew for him to get any credibility or the cash flow he needed, and especially the distribution he needed at dealerships, he was gonna have to partner with a car company. And that car company ended up being Daimler-Benz. They make Mercedes-Benz. So the Swatchmobile was dead, essentially, as far as the name goes. The name came from the combination of Swatch and Mercedes and art. That's the smart car today. So again, it's not the Swatchmobile, but it was absolutely critical for him to get his idea into production and to dealerships in Europe and the US. Now think about this on a much smaller scale. You have a network. You use this network to connect with friends and update them with really important news. And you also use it to showcase your work. Now, when you team up with others, you don't just inherit their exciting point of view and their expertise, you also get access to their networks and their connections. So chances are they're going to want to share the finished product with their network, which means that your idea gets exposed to way more people than it would have if you acted alone. Working together opens your eyes. Okay, so when you were in college, you had your roommate review your term paper before you turned it in. Why? Why did you do this? It's probably because you were so close to it, you knew you'd read right over any typos that were there. You were so close to that piece of work. And I think that sometimes we get so close to our own work, even as professionals, forget term papers. Sometimes we're so close to it that we can't see the most glaring issues that are there inside of them. So your collaborators are going to bring with them a fresh set of eyes, and they might be able to point out something that you would have missed. Here's an example. This is Where magazine. Where magazine. So the first E is really important. And if you are, I'm sorry if you work for Where magazine. I'm sorry. I had to use it though. I'm guessing that the people working on this project were just so close to the publication that they took for granted that everybody would see Where magazine. And for the unfortunate young lady on the front of it, it kind of looks like Whore magazine. So perhaps somebody who was a little bit distanced from the project could have pointed this out. Working together makes you better at all the other stuff. So this may seem a little counterintuitive. How am I getting better at the other things if I'm relying on other people to do them? The way I think of it is that if I were to go out there and learn InDesign tomorrow, which would be awesome if I could learn InDesign in one day, but if I trained myself how to use it, I'd still be approaching projects as a copywriter who understands InDesign. I think working with others helps you approach projects with different points of view. When I started out in advertising, I was always told, great writers think like art directors, and great art directors think like writers. And I think that's really true. A great example of this is the Creators Live installation. This was part of the Creatives Project in San Francisco. And it was a collaboration between Intel and Social Print Studio. And basically the installation aggregated Instagram photos taken at this event and then allowed people to interact with them just using motion-based gestures. So there were no instructions. It was super intuitive. People just started using it. And one of the Intel engineers associated with the project said that it's actually changed the way that he approaches all of his projects moving forwards. He said that technologists for a long time have had this idea that we know the technology and we'll get other people to adapt to it by training them how to use it. But once he worked with Social Print Studio, he discovered that he should approach every interaction and menu and interface by questioning, are people going to have to be trained how to use this? Or will they know how to use it because it's built the way that people are built? And I think that's really beautiful. I'm getting really close to the mic. I think that's a really beautiful thing about collaboration is that it changes the way you even look at the next project you're working on. So even if the next one you go on solo, you have that perspective with you, and you take that into the next project. As I got to thinking about it, a lot of the lessons you learn when you are 8 years old apply to how to successfully and effectively work with other people. A big one, always share, right? You always have to share. That was a big one when you were 8. And I'm of the opinion that you shouldn't just make your teammates your co-collaborators, like, oh, they're kind of a partner. I feel like you should make people co-owners of that idea you have. And I know that's kind of like, oh man, like I'll give them credit for what they're doing, but that was my idea. Like I came up with it all by myself. Why make them a co-owner? And the best way to put it is, do you remember when we were all little and we were playing and we were with a group of friends and we were doing something that you shouldn't have been doing and you got busted? What's the first thing you said? Wasn't my idea. I had nothing to do with it. This is the best visual aid I could come up with for this side. I'm sorry. It's from my personal collection. But it wasn't me. I had nothing to do with it. This was not my idea. So I think making them co-owners forces them to put a little skin in the game, right? Like it increases their want for it to succeed. Nobody wants to be associated with a flop or a failure. Making them feel like this is as much their idea as it is yours is going to increase the likelihood that they're going to bring their best work, their best game, and they're going to want it to succeed just as much as you do. Don't be a bully. Okay. A lot of creatives have compared ideas to babies, right? And it makes sense. You created it. You love it. You get nervous when other people touch it. And you're absolutely insulted if somebody calls it ugly or if somebody tells you how to raise it. This baby, whatever. I think it's that parental instinct that makes it really difficult for people to collaborate without getting defensive or sometimes just downright nasty. I think with so much personally invested in an idea, it's not easy to share parenting duties with somebody else, even if you realize that you can't do it all by yourself. So to avoid being a bully, just a couple quick tips. First, choose your partners wisely. Chances are, if you have a healthy amount of respect for them and a good rapport with them, you're also going to respect their input and any criticisms they may have. This is important. Before you work together, be completely clear about what's expected of each team member and have a clear shared vision of where the idea is going. If you're not willing to budge on particular details of the idea, tell them up front, and don't be surprised if that's a deal breaker for some teammates. But it's better to figure that out before you've engaged in the actual creation of the project than 3/4 of the way down and you're going in two different directions. So I think it's just great to be clear up front. And then the most important one, I think, is just to be open. Be open to discussion and be open to questions and challenges and exploration. I think one of the most powerful phrases in my business is, well, let's take a look at it. I mean, let's take a look at it. We'll see. Oftentimes you realize when you take a look at it that it's not the right idea and you were correct. But sometimes you realize it was 100 times better than what you initially started with. I think the important thing is taking a look at it, honoring their input. It shows them that you value what they're bringing to this partnership. So be open. Only turn in your best work. So this was like the biggest rule of Mrs. Shadle's second grade classroom. But I think it's really important to be thinking about before you're bringing an idea to collaborators. Is it ready? Do you have a clear understanding of what you are hoping to accomplish? Do you believe in your idea? So many times I've seen people start to pitch an idea and then just quickly back out of it. Like, oh, I had this idea and it's, now that I'm looking at it, it's kind of stupid, but here it is anyways. This idea is not ready to share. Now, don't get me wrong, I am constantly bouncing half-baked ideas off of my husband, off of my coworkers, off of the security people in our building. Like anybody who will listen to me, I will bounce a half-baked idea at them. But before you ask somebody to invest their time or their talent or their money into a project, be confident that it is a true idea. So you don't need to know exactly how to make it happen, but you need to know why it needs to happen, and you need to convince people of that. So how do you know when you have an idea? That's like the ultimate question. Like, is this idea worth pursuing? Chip Heath and Dan Heath co-wrote a book, and it's all about the principles that make an idea an effective idea, or to use their term, a sticky idea. This book is geared towards us advertising folks, but I think 4 of the 6 principles, or the criteria they use, apply to any of us trying to determine if an idea is really worth pursuing. So for the sake of time and relevancy, I'm only going to show you those 4. The first principle is simplicity. The more we say, the less people tend to remember. And that's true of words, but it's also true of thematics and images. The more you put out there, the less likely people are going to walk away with a clear idea. So therefore, it's really important to say as little as possible while being as profound as possible. The book cites the golden rule as the perfect example of this. A one-sentence statement so profound that an individual could spend a whole lifetime learning to follow it. Plus, it gives me an excuse to use this beautiful print by Studio on Fire, so I had to include it. Early on in my career, I walked into my boss's office with like 5 paragraphs I had written on a single idea that I was trying to pitch as part of this new business presentation. And I didn't even get into the doorway. He's like, whoa, what is that? I'm like, oh, it's this idea I have for a campaign idea, I guess. And he's like, turn around. If you've got a powerful idea on your hands, you'll know it, and you should be able to express it in like a sentence, less than a sentence, in a fragment. You should be able to get me to understand the power of your idea. It doesn't need 5 paragraphs. It should only need a few words. What did I press? Okay. Is it unexpected? How many times have you been watching a TV show or a movie and gone, I know where this is going, or like, I've seen this before? Well, at that point, you are no longer absorbing that content. You are busy high-fiving your brain for recognizing a pattern. So great ideas break patterns. Ask yourself if your idea is disruptive and if it will create curiosity. I love a particular story that Luke Williams of Frog Design tells about a group of friends that went out to dinner in San Francisco in 2003, and the discussion turned to disruptive ideas for new businesses. So they were just trying to out-crazy each other, coming up with these ideas for goofy businesses, and somebody brought up the idea of selling mismatched socks. And the group, as the story goes, thought it was the dumbest idea ever. But one member, whose name is Jonah Staw, was intrigued. I mean, after all, the sock category is pretty sleepy. And we've all had that experience where we've had to get rid of a perfectly good sock because we'd lost his mate. So he and several friends would end up collaborating to create Little Mismatched, which started out selling colorful, unmatched socks in odd-numbered packages, so like 3s and 5s and 7s. And they were meant to encourage young girls to express their creativity and individuality through mismatching. And there's a bug. Okay. And it's just exploded. Now Little Mismatched is sold pretty much at like all the major department stores. They have their own boutiques. It's gangbusters. And it was all because they came up with an idea for the sake of coming up with disruptive ideas. Like, they built a whole multi-million-dollar business just trying to be goofy, and I think that's great. The next principle, is it concrete? This is the notion that what we can see and touch and experience is more memorable and sticky to us than the abstract, which is kind of tricky, right, when we're talking about the concept of ideas, which just seem so abstract and out there. But I think of the notion of concreteness as truth. So is there truth in that idea? What is the truth that's driving it? Whenever I try and sell an idea to a client, that's where I start, is the truth that drives the idea, that shared experience that we all have that makes it sticky and makes it so concrete. So if I was pitching Little Mismatched to a collaborator or to a client, I'd start with the frustration of losing one of your favorite socks. What is the deal with socks? I'm sorry, my Seinfeld's terrible. I'm sorry. I had to do it. So, you lose a sock. So what happens? You hold on to the other one, and you either put it on top of the dryer, or you put it on top of the dresser, Or if you're like me, you have a special Tupperware container just for mismatched socks. And finally, because you're sick of looking at it, or because you're moving or cleaning or whatever, you give up and you get rid of the lone sock. And as soon as I have everybody in the room nodding their head like, yeah, I hate that, or like, I share that experience with you, I know that truth, that's when I hit them with the idea. But what if it didn't matter if our socks matched? What if mismatched socks wasn't just socially acceptable? It was a statement of your personality. It's exposing that raw truth that drives the idea that makes an audience so much more receptive to it. So make sure there's truth in the idea. And finally, and maybe the biggest one, is your idea emotion? Will it make the audience feel something? I think when we all think of emotional ideas, maybe the first thing that comes to mind is the Sarah McLachlan ASPCA commercials, right? Oh my God, they do make you feel like shit. They're just so bad. But despite having the very best intentions, I think they've been nationally lampooned and criticized for just how awful they make you feel. But there are a lot of great ideas that are awesome because of the emotions they create. A good example of this I like to use is the Truth Campaign. The Truth Campaign was unique because unlike anti-tobacco messaging before, which is like kind of shaming smokers, like, oh, do you know what you're doing to yourself? It's so awful. The Truth Campaign took a different angle, and they wanted to create outrage at big tobacco because they wanted to create a movement against the sale of cigarettes. So they actually ended up doing all these crazy stunts outside big tobacco companies. One of the most memorable ones was when they brought in over 1,000 fake body bags and lined them outside the doors of a big tobacco company. These were extremely memorable and effective because they created outrage. It wasn't like, I probably shouldn't smoke. It was like, oh my God, these people are selling these death things. It's awful. Like, we should do something. And it didn't just work with smokers. It was mostly non-smokers who loved smokers and were like, I can't believe that big tobacco is allowed to do this. So it was really powerful, really memorable because it took a different emotional approach in creating outrage. On a happier note, when Volkswagen's agency set out to promote their line of environmentally friendly cars, they maintained the idea that more people would drive hybrids. In fact, we'd all be driving hybrids if they were more fun to drive. So that led them to the fun theory, and that theory is we can change people's behavior for the better by making it fun. So one of the first things that they did was they challenged themselves to make taking the stairs more fun than the escalator. And the escalator is fun, so how are you going to make it more fun? And they did that by taking a set of subway stairs and turning it into a functioning piano, right? So this actually played the notes as you went up and down the stairs. And first of all, it increased the use of the stairs by 66% while it was in place, so it was super effective. But like just watching these people like up and down the stairs and playing with it, like you couldn't help but feel that joy that Volkswagen was trying to elicit. It was so powerful. So here's people enjoying the stairs and nobody's on the escalator. It's a really powerful notion that making things fun can change people's behavior. The fun theory has been so effective that they've actually opened it up to user submissions, and one user had the idea of like, well, we have a really busy pedestrian crossing and we're concerned about the speed limit there, and everybody goes above the speed limit, right? It's just fun to do. So, sorry, Mom and Dad. So they came up with the idea of the speed lottery, and this was a speed trap, right? It worked like any other speed trap in that it took pictures of speeders and sent them tickets and they had to pay a fine, not so fun. But what was different about it was it also took pictures of the people that were obeying the speed limit, and those people were entered into a lottery to win the fine money. So it's kind of brilliant, right? And while it was in place, the average speed limit went from 32 to 25. So people will go the speed limit if you give them a good reason to. Make it fun. A lottery is fun. So, here we go. I'm back. If one of those emotional, true, disruptive, or profound ideas should ever pop into your head, think of the things you learned when you were 8. Work together, always share, don't be a bully, only turn in your best work, only turn in those great sticky ideas. And perms aren't forever, but they are for a while. That's my time. I just want to say thank you again so much for letting me stand up here and talk to you. And thank you to my friends who came out to support me and my family and my husband and Joseph and Jeff again. And that's my Twitter handle. If you have any questions for me or if you ever want to collaborate, I'm game. Come find me. I'm at Steph the Twit on Twitter. Thank you so much.